leech as a machine is really very, very well crafted. I mean, the leech is not designed to kill its host. It's really designed to get a little bit of blood out and to leave the rest of the host alone.
The maggot is a microsurgeon. We want a happy, hungry maggot. Yes, we want a happy, hungry maggot, healthy and raring to go.
I was referred to as a breathing corpse. What is a bee sting going to do? I mean, make me do cartwheels or something? I just couldn't believe that. A bee, a little, I couldn't believe it.
Modern medicine works miracles and saves human lives. In the 20th century, the discovery of antibiotics, miracle drugs, and sophisticated surgical techniques caused a revolution in medical science. But when man-made drugs and surgery fail, medics are turning back the clock and using live creatures to heal: leeches, maggots, and bees. It's called biosurgery. The leech once played a major role in healing. In medieval times, people used bloodletting as a cure for aches and pains, fevers, hysteria, and even melancholia. Barber surgeons paid barefooted peasants to wade into streams to gather leeches. In Europe, they became so fashionable, they almost became extinct. Just a year and a half ago, Schuyler Levy was playing happily in his upstate New York garden. When his cousin arrived, his mother Jolie saw them in the games room.
Schuyler was in the next room with his cousin, playing on an exercise bike. And I heard Schuyler say, "Ow, Mommy, ow." I went in, I saw his pinky dangling, hanging by a thread. I remember holding my son with tears pouring down my face, looking at my husband saying, "He's going to lose his finger. I know he's going to lose his finger."
Jolie had stepped out of the room not 30 seconds before that.
Schuyler was rushed to the hospital and went straight into surgery.
For 5 hours and 45 minutes, we watched the clock tick. We went from trying to cheer each other to being hysterical crying. And when Dr. Petro did finally appear, she said, "I gave it my best shot. He's not going to be able to keep his finger. He's going to lose it."
Microsurgeon Dr. Jane Petro had spent hours reattaching Schuyler's tiny veins, but she couldn't get the blood to circulate.
If you've got part of the nose or the ear or the fingers, especially little fingers or badly damaged fingers, getting the veins to work is really, really hard.
Unless she could get the blood to flow, 2-year-old Schuyler's little finger would have to be removed. With some hesitation, and as a last resort, Dr. Petro turned to extraordinary allies for help. She keeps a jar of European medicinal leeches on standby for emergencies.
Here's the leech farm. It looks ready to go.
For weeks, Dr. Petro used leeches to draw the blood through Schuyler's fragile veins with their powerful suckers.
In Schuyler's case especially, it's one of the longest periods of time that I've had to leech a patient. And there were several times when the finger got really quite dark blue and quite heavily congested. And that's usually a sign when it gets really, really, really dark that you've got so much stagnation of the blood that there's no way you're going to be able to reestablish good flow.
The leech latches onto the skin. It uses its 3 jaws and 300 razor-sharp teeth to cut holes in the flesh and injects an anticoagulant to stop clotting while it fills itself with blood.
put it on the table.
You want to sit on my
here?
lap? Here, come here, sit on my lap. That's a good boy.
With the leeches to restore the flow, Skylar's tiniest blood vessels had time to heal. His pinky has survived.
Can you pick that up?
Thanks to the leeches.
Good. All right. Let's see if we can measure this pinky. Here we go. Can you straighten it out as far as you can straighten it out, okay? Good boy. Yeah, I think there's no question that leeches make all the difference in the world, especially for what I call the small bit replants.
Hey, I wasn't ready. It happened again.
By the time Skylar left hospital, he'd grown to love his leeches, and the finger works well. As microsurgery becomes more highly developed, the healing properties of the blood-sucking leech are being recognized once again. There are 650 species of leech, but only 11 types are used in medicine. The leech is a close cousin to the simple earthworm. It loves fast-flowing streams. They cling to rocks and await the chance to feed on fresh blood, animal or human. These days, medicinal leeches are specially bred. Skylar's came from Wales in Great Britain. Biofarm is leech heaven.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Carl Peters looks after the 50,000 leeches that live in this dark world. One day, these leeches will take centre stage in somebody's life-threatening operation. Biofarm is the largest breeding centre for leeches in Western Europe. Each leech has both male and female parts. They're hermaphrodite, but they must be in pairs to produce offspring. They secrete tiny cocoons to protect their eggs and hide them in moss. Thousands of baby leeches are born at Biofarm each year. Carl checks the cocoons after 3 weeks, then harvests the babies from the cocoon, 24 at a time. Some will be kept for breeding, others go to hospitals. Leeches feed only on blood. Their first meal is a sausage filled with pig's blood. In the wild, it might be a frog. As they feed, they swell to about 10 times their size until they're completely bloated. They won't be fed again for 6 months. By the time they reach the hospitals, they'll be ravenous. Carl nets the hungry leeches by the hundreds. Orders pour in from all over the world every day. Biofarm leeches travel thousands of miles. At this San Francisco hospital, the Department of Microsurgery always keeps leeches on standby. They're famous for reattaching severed limbs, fingers, hands, and even ears. Surgeon Dr. Gabriel Kind likes to make sure his patients know that leeching might follow surgery.
I tell the patients you're going to have to be in the hospital for a while. I talk about leeches. I talk about the downside of leeches, which is that if we have to leech a finger, the chance of the patient needing a blood transfusion goes up.
That's because although each leech draws off only a few teaspoonsful of blood, after leeching, bleeding continues for up to 8 hours. Reattaching the minute body parts is only the beginning.
There's certainly been a lot of patients of mine who've lost their fingers after I've put them back on. And there's a certain time post-op, usually in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th day, where you really don't know. And that's the perfect case for the leech to help us to save a finger.
These leeches are being lined up for a patient whose reattached finger has run into trouble. Builder Ray Seed was operated on 2 days ago.
I was working on a drill, changing a bit, and as I was tightening the chuck on the bit, my hand slipped off of it. I hit the trigger, so the drill spun around, and the chuck key grabbed my finger and tore it off, and it was hanging there, so I obviously had to get it sewed back on.
But there's still no blood flow, and Ray's finger is blackening. With no time to lose, Ray gets ready for his first leech.
That would be Larry the leech, right?
Yeah, Larry the leech. We let him go to work.
Oh, he just took right to that, didn't he?
Yeah, he's all set.
Holy
Look at this.
cow.
Like any creature the leech might feed on in the wild, Ray doesn't feel a thing. The leech exudes a mild anesthetic before it cuts back the skin. It then injects pyridine, an anticoagulant, to stop the blood from clotting. Blood is then drawn through the veins by the leech's forceful sucking motion. For hours, fresh, oxygen-filled blood will flow through the finger. Ray's first leech is nearly through feeding, engorged with his blood. His wound will ooze all day. Keeping up the flow of fresh blood is vital for healing. It'll be days before Ray knows whether the leeches can rescue his finger. His operation was relatively simple. He only injured the tip. Microsurgeons perform intricate operations as a result of accidents day and night. But no drug or technology can outperform the leech in bringing body parts back to life. Even the leeches met a challenge when Mike Tuttle turned up. He'd severed most of his fingers.
Well, the very first thing you think of is how stupid, how could I be so stupid as to cut off my own fingers on a saw? A millisecond before it happened, I thought my hand's pretty close to the blade. And it was just that quickly that they were gone.
Mike had sawn off his thumb and 2 fingers, but he had the presence of mind to bring the pieces with him.
It took the ambulance about 30 to 40 minutes to get me over to here. And at that time I was like, just turn on the lights and get me there. I was starting to panic at that point, going, okay, I don't know if they can reattach these. And if they can, I'm sure the time's a factor.
Mike was in luck. The ambulance took him to the most advanced microsurgery facility on the West Coast, where Gabe Kind was on duty.
This is a picture of Mike Tuttle's hand. I have already taken the thumb and the long finger and prepared them for replantation. These metal bars coming through here are the wires that we use to fix the bones. So essentially this was really replanting 3 fingers.
Oh, I'm sorry to get scared.
It takes 3.5 hours to reattach each finger, so Mike was up for 9 hours of surgery. After the operation, his thumb turned purple, then black. Gabe Kind applied leeches, one after the other.
After this aggressive leech therapy on the second morning, it turned just like that. It was, all of a sudden they're coming in and they're like, wow, let's bring some other people in here and show them how good it's looking now. And so, yeah, I think that it had a lot to do with the successful outcome of me being able to at least keep my thumb. So you can see the length in the long finger is 3/4 of an inch less. Ring fingers, a little bit less. They didn't have to remove the entire joint in that finger, so it's not as dramatic as the long finger is. And the thumb is still smaller and shorter, obviously, because it has no joint either, but it does the job.
Ray's still got a long way to go, but he's learning to love his leeches.
Okay, your job is to babysit, okay?
Okay.
The finger's looking better.
Yeah, got lots of color in it. The blood's nice bright red, and it ain't stopped bleeding all night. You should have seen the puddle of blood I woke up in this morning. So we got a little skinny leech here. My son, he came up yesterday, and he named him Boomer.
Hey, look at Boomer's already climbing out. Okay. Yeah, he's on there.
Okay, it's pretty much a waiting game now.
It's almost like the finger is a city, and the blood vessels are the highways coming into the city. The cars on the highway are the actual blood cells. And when a finger is cut off, we can't possibly repair all the roads coming in and out of town. So you can imagine that if they can't get out of town, eventually everything gets stopped up, just like a big traffic jam, and the cars can no longer come into town. So what the leech actually does is it's really just taking the cars out of the town.
Yep, one side's dropped off already. Yep. No, they attach both ends. One end sucks and the other end's just attached. And when they get real full, one side drops off, and the other, the side that they suck on, remains. Oh, he's done.
Their next patient was the victim of a dog attack.
Dog came out to me, he started jumping on me and scratching me. I was just thinking I need to get to the end of the chain and get outside of his range because this is getting to be a really dangerous situation. And I didn't realize I had my thumb caught in the chain. Basically ran to the end of the chain and ran my thumb off. Saw the thumb on the ground. 2 seconds later, dog picks up the thumb in his mouth. 1 second later, he drops it. Fortunately, I grab the thumb and run to the neighbors, which is 2 minutes away, and call 911.
Once Kim's thumb was lined up, the next stages of the procedure were explained. Surgery, then possibly leeching.
I said, okay, real live leeches you're talking about. I understand the same thing here. We're talking about real leeches. Oh yeah, okay. Hey, I like it.
Kim didn't get as far as leeching. The dog had torn out an essential tendon and the thumb could not be reattached.
The worst moment is when you come out and could they reattach it? No. 15 minutes later, a nurse said they do this transplant where they transplant your big toe to your thumb. He went and got me a photograph of these transplanted thumbs. I took one look at it and I said, great.
Kim's operation to turn her big toe into a thumb is performed by Dr. Harry Bunke, one of the pioneers of the technique. Nowadays he can do complicated procedures like substituting a thumb with a toe, but it took him 10 years to perfect the needle small enough to sew tiny blood vessels together.
If you look at a paper clip, the diameter of that is just about 1 millimeter, and we put anywhere from 8 to 10 stitches in that. And the ability to repair a vessel of that size was really the breakthrough in microsurgery, because if you can do that, you can replant a finger or an ear or a lip. There are other vessels that are much bigger than this, but without the ability to work at this level, microsurgery never would have gotten off the ground.
Now 79, Dr. Bunke still supervises complex operations like Kim's. It will take 2 teams 8 hours each. Dr. Gabe Kine prepares her hand. Dr. Bunke's team works on the toe. They peel back all the flesh down to the blood vessels and tendons. Every tiny vein will need to be reattached before the toe can function.
Jerry, when do we take the tourniquet down?
The first stage is over. Kim's toe is severed. Gabe makes a photographic record of every remarkable moment. Kim's toe is positioned. The 7 centimeters of tendon will replace those ripped out by the dog. The fit looks good. Next comes the crucial process of repairing the veins. Dr. Kine checks blood flow in even the tiniest vessels.
What I'm just doing here shows that there's flow across our repair right here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to just squeeze the vessel kind of gently and strip the blood. Now the blood's empty there. Then I let go and you can see that that's flow.
It'll be 2 days before they know whether Kim's amazing new thumb will be the biosurgeon's next job.
We'll eventually call it a thumb, but right now it's a little bit of both. We're in the transition time where it's still both. So of course, I'll get used to it and everything, but there was a scary moment of, oh my gosh, what have we done? This is like something out of Frankenstein.
The art of leeching, once dismissed as barbaric, has won its place at the heart of microsurgery. 7 days after his operation, Ray Steed can thank the humble leech that his blood flow is back to normal.
Very successful leech. He sucked it right up. He must have had some good anticoagulants in him. I think I'm going to get to keep this finger.
This primeval living creature and microscopic surgery have formed an inseparable partnership. Ancient magic harnessed to modern science.
When they save a finger, it saves thousands and thousands of dollars. I mean, not only shortens the period of congestion, but it increases the possibility of survival tremendously. So they're very cost effective. I would say the best drug we have.
Leeches are not the only live creatures in the pharmacy. Medicine has found an ally in this tiny insect larvae. It can do something drugs cannot do. It eats diseased flesh. At the Princess of Wales Hospital in Bridgend in Britain, they pioneer treatments for health problems that drugs cannot cure. In this annex, a unique experimental dressing for ulcerating wounds has been developed. In the lab, they breed huge greenbottle flies, feeding them a diet of prime fresh liver. Their offspring is the maggot. Live maggot dressings for wounds that refuse to heal is the latest specialty treatment on offer from nurse Mary Jones.
And when we first started to publicise the treatments, we were getting a lot of mail from people all over the country, from patients who were quite ill themselves, and from relatives of patients who were quite ill.
The story of how these slimy creatures found their way into the research lab at Bridgend starts a long way back. Dr. John Church pioneered the use of fly larvae in surgical dressings. He recalls his first surprise encounter with maggots when he lived in Africa. His father ran a hospital. People travelled for days on foot from outlying areas to reach the clinics, and the heat attracted flies.
People would come in with open wounds, and flies will naturally lay eggs on an open wound. We began to see that the wounds in fact were clean. Far from the maggots doing these patients any harm, these wounds were actually looking better sometimes than we could do.
The experience of seeing human flesh crawling with maggots was initially repellent.
In those days, our perception was that the maggot was a filthy little creature and was only doing harm. But my thoughts have changed since.
John Church was so convinced that the maggots could help wounds to heal if only they could be reared hygienically, that he set out to find a way to do it and developed a technique that will reassure both doctors and patients. He set up his garage as a lab and caught 40 flies. Then he put together a basic breeding kit.
You can see it's very simple, low-tech. I must say, though, that this is, I think, an important little bit of apparatus. It's a dissecting microscope, and then that allows me to study them.
John Church quickly became an expert on the biology of the maggot. Ideal conditions, warmth and high-protein food meant that his garage soon became a thriving maggot farm.
This cage is what we would have the adults in. And if I'm going to feed them, I'd have a little bit of food, so we say in a container like that. And so as they don't escape, I have a sleeve, very simple, very low tech, and I can introduce the food like in this fashion, like that, and in goes the food. And with a flip, I have closed it again.
John's muslin cages were the model for the plastic breeding boxes at Bridgend, which now supplies maggots for hospitals all over Great Britain. It's the first commercial facility in the world producing sterile fly larvae. This batch of newly emerged flies received their first meal of fresh liver. Lab assistant Karen Blemish oversees the breeding program.
The flies have a first liver feed, which gives them protein to enable them to lay eggs, because until they've had protein, they're not capable of producing any eggs. So they will never lay eggs the first time they have liver. Any subsequent liver feeds they're given, they'll lay eggs on those. The eggs then can be processed, sterilised, and put into flasks to hatch out.
The rapid breeding cycle of the greenbottle fly turns the lab into a production line. The eggs will be bathed in a sterilizing solution. They're then left in a temperature-controlled incubator for 16 days. When the maggots emerge, they're bacteria-free and ready for work. Community nurse Mary Jones collects fresh maggot dressings every day. On her patients, they've worked miracles.
In this area alone, we've salvaged 5 limbs from amputation by using the maggots. People with gangrenous toes and feet.
Legs and feet can turn gangrenous when circulation is poor. If the life-threatening infection spreads to other parts of the body, amputation is the only solution. Mary is treating a diabetic patient with a festering wound. What was the reaction from her family when the hospital prescribed maggots?
Oh, they were horrified. The thought of it, but it didn't worry me.
The sore on Mary Ronan's heel has ulcerated. Several courses of antibiotic made no impact. She is unable to walk or leave the house. But an army of tiny surgeons working round the clock have been tending her for the past 2 days.
There they are. Can you see them?
The maggots have been gorging on Mary's suppurating heel. They hungrily gobble up the pus, infectious bacteria and rotting dead flesh 24 hours a day. The idea of having tiny worm-like creatures crawling over our bodies goes against modern-day obsessions with hygiene. But doctors in Britain are convinced that to win the race against killer infections, there's nothing better than the maggot. The maggots have eaten most of the goo, and round the edge of the wound, new flesh is starting to grow.
Well, it is a miracle, it is, yes, wonderful. I'd recommend it to anybody, and there's no need to be nervous because you don't feel anything at all. You don't know them things are there.
Initially, patients do say sometimes, please don't tell anybody. Hospital and community patients, they don't want anybody to know, but the minute it's on, they tell everybody.
A new dressing, 150 greedy baby maggots for 3 days, and Mary's foot should be healed. Back at the lab, thousands of maggots are ready to go. In Manchester, St Mary's Hospital depends on maggot biosurgery for diabetic patients. Heavy doses of antibiotic failed to shift the raging infection in David Eisner's foot.
I was having a very, very strong dose of intravenous antibiotics about 4 times a day, and it just wasn't having an effect.
The doctor told me that Dave would probably have to have his leg amputated below the knee. And I said, well, it's okay, I said, because we've spoken about this many a time. And because I'm diabetic as well, and I have very bad varicose eczema, I've always said that we'd end up with 3 legs between 2 of us.
Val was accepting, but former taxi driver David wasn't ready to lose his foot and his ability to drive. David had 2 gangrenous toes removed, but the foot would not heal. He agreed to try maggot therapy, and today the bandages come off. The maggots have burrowed right down into the heart of David's infection. The beauty of the maggot is that it feeds only on decaying matter. Even if they did escape from the bandage, there's no danger of them eating healthy human flesh. Inside a pus-filled wound, there's a build-up of poisonous bacteria. The maggot penetrates the infected matter with 2 tiny hooks. It spews out powerful enzymes which dissolve the dead tissue, turning bacteria and pus into a soup. It then slurps the soup back up, a kind of liquid lunch. Scientists believe that maggot secretions may even stimulate the growth of healthy new flesh. David's doctor, Andrew Bolton, sings their praises.
David was faced with amputation as one real possibility at the beginning because we had a surgical wound that wasn't healing well, it was infected, and it was a large area. Maggot therapy has really been a great boost to him and has helped to preserve his leg. How's it looking?
Looking quite good, actually.
I don't think anybody likes anything, any foreign body crawling about on them, or the idea of it, but once they were in, that was it. There was really no sensation. And now I can't speak highly enough of it. It really has been brilliant.
It was during the Civil War that American medics first made favourable comments on the value of maggots. Dr. J.F. Zacharias noted in his diary that maggots in a single day clean wounds better than any other agent. "I'm sure I saved many lives by their use," he wrote. The discovery of antibiotics in the 1940s took medicine by storm, and maggot treatment virtually stopped. Surgeon Dr. Jane Petro was shocked by what happened to the first maggot-infected patients she treated.
Early on in my career, this guy came in with a huge, fungating, really awful head and neck tumor. The tumor was disgusting. The maggots made it even more so. So our first act was to think, oh my God, we've got to get rid of these maggots. Then I picked it clean, washed everything up, put a dressing on the wound, and the guy died the next day. And when he died, it looked as though he had suddenly had this overwhelming infection. And, you know, as a simple young doctor, I didn't have a lot of sophisticated ideas, but it seemed to me quite apparent. Here's this guy walking around for years with this tumor, and probably for at least months with this maggot infestation. And he dies the day we take away the maggots. So I started thinking, how did that help? What did that do for him?
We now know that maggots may be about to make a comeback in America. Stalking the corridors of hospitals are vicious new strains of superbug, resistant to antibiotics. Once these new strains take hold, they're virtually impossible to stop, spreading rapidly, causing raging infections and frequently death. New research shows that maggots may be a way to defeat the superbugs. Antibiotics bounce off some types of bacteria, which build a defensive wall around themselves called biofilm. Although antibiotics cannot penetrate the biofilm, maggot enzymes simply dissolve it, along with the killer bugs. It extracts them, making them harmless. Burn patients are a prime target for superbug infections with their open wounds and long hospital stays. A surgical skin graft is the usual way to restore burnt skin, but with superbug infection likely, an operation could be deadly. Jane Petro favours using maggots to clean up the damaged skin and stimulate new growth, rather than risk invasive surgery.
I think that we have to start rethinking the whole issue of infection control in patients and look at the ways that we can modify the environment and also modify our prescribing habits. It's my personal feeling that antibiotics should be more strictly regulated than narcotics.
In future, maggots could take the pressure off the overuse of antibiotics, the greatest threat to modern medicine. Biosurgery is also solving some medical problems that have baffled science. Some of its remedies are unproven and painful. 5 years ago, a mysterious illness paralyzed the owner of a thriving floristry business just after she made news headlines.
Normally, Silk Station's not even open on Sundays, but they are open today, making and displaying their yellow ribbons right alongside the American flag.
Beverly Polyak-Petix started a yellow ribbon campaign during the Gulf War, selling the ribbons as a reminder of the American troops who were risking their lives overseas. Months later, Beverly lost her business and feared she was losing her life.
I had dark circles under my eyes to where it literally looked like I was a heroin addict or something.
I was losing my daughter day by day, a little bit every day, and that was very scary for me, very upsetting.
It was after the birth of her daughter, Ashley, that Beverly gradually began to lose her ability to move, devastated by crippling pain.
You could actually feel the pain resonating from each and every joint. I had a headache, which I'd had for 3 months. And when I say a headache for 3 months, I mean a headache that does not go away.
After seeing 14 doctors, Beverly was finally diagnosed as having chronic fatigue syndrome, for which there's no known cure.
I thought, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm dying. I have a little child to raise, but nobody can help me.
As a last resort, she turned to a live creature.
When she said that she was going to try the therapy, I was very happy about that because I thought, you know, we've exhausted all the medical end of it.
Pulsating out of the stinger is a powerful cocktail of chemicals. Once the venom entered Beverly's bloodstream, the effect was magical.
I sat up and I said, you guys aren't going to believe this, but, you know, I can move. I can actually move my arm. It doesn't hurt. And I still had this awful headache, so I said to Ann, I said, you're going to think I'm nuts, but would you sting the base of my neck, which is where it seems that this pain originated from? And she said, oh no, that's okay. That's one of our sites. We sting there.
And the very first thing that I noticed was that awful matte finish from her eyes was lifting, almost as though someone pulled a shade from her eyes and the sparkle came back.
Now I run, I go, I do. I work 12 hours a day sometimes. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I have a house, and I can do it all. I can do it all now.
Beverly's life was miraculously transformed. But what is there in simple bee venom to wield such power and give this young woman back her youth? Bees have been treasured by mankind for their health-giving properties since the beginning of time. Beekeepers endure the threat of their vicious stings to harvest honey, with its exotic mix of vitamins, minerals and wax. Another byproduct, royal jelly, which worker bees produce to feed their babies and the queen, is virtually regarded as an elixir of youth. But diseases of the immune system, like chronic fatigue syndrome, people who use the bee stings do so out of sheer faith. There's no medical evidence to support the value of the bee venom, yet. But in rural Missouri, evidence found in the brain of a patient with multiple sclerosis helped persuade doctors and scientists to take an interest in the venom. Dr. Sam Farrell and his wife ran a medical practice for 35 years. When Mary Eleanor was struck down with MS in 1996, they decided to use injections of bee venom, even though it's not approved by the FDA.
You want to do an arm today?
Yes. If someone would come to me, a patient with MS, would I prescribe them bee venom? Most likely not. If someone came to me and said, doctor, would you help me with bee venom? I want to give it for my MS. I said, most certainly, I would be glad to help you. But that has to do with the legal ramifications of the American medical system.
Mary Eleanor began using injections of pure venom 5 months after her diagnosis.
The bee venom really does hurt. It's just truly like a real bee.
I'm actually giving her 12 bees injection. The same as the venom if she got 12 little bees stuck on her. I usually touch it with my hand so I know where she's cold. Raise a little welt, just like a bee would do.
This gives me incredible energy. This was the first thing I noticed.
2 years ago, when this first started out, she could not wrap the presents for her grandchildren. She could not wrap tie the bows or wrap the packages. This past Christmas, she was able to do all of them without assistance, which to me is wonderful.
As a medical doctor, Sam could see vast improvements in his wife's physical performance. But her latest MRI brain scans took him completely by surprise. To confirm suspected MS 3 years ago, Mary had her first MRI scan.
Here we go, this one's 2 minutes now, hold very still.
Each picture, showing a cross-section of the brain, comes out of the MRI immediately. Sam got the proof he needed.
When you look at the MRI, you look at these white spots, and they represent scars or the sclerosis in multiple sclerosis. multiple sclerosis means multiple scars. Each part of the brain controls different functions in your body. And when these become diseased, you lose various functions depending on where the disease is located.
Comparing scans taken 3 years ago of the exact same slice of Mary Eleanor's brain, we would expect the scars to have spread. But in her case, the progression seems to have stopped.
It definitely shows objective evidence of improvement, even though clinically we knew she was better all along.
Sam also claims the scars are shrinking. Could it be due to venom? Nobody knows. Everything we do is controlled by messages from the brain. They travel along the nerves via a protective tissue called myelin. In MS, our own body cells, which usually attack disease, the immune system, attack the myelin and interrupt the flow of messages, like an electrical cable short-circuiting. Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., partnership with the MS Association of America, has begun a study of bee venom. Thousands of sufferers of this incurable wasting disease and their growing belief in venom treatments convinced Dr. Joseph Balante to take up the challenge.
My first response was it sounded a bit off the wall. You know, I says, oh my God, I mean, what are we doing here? But then after reflecting upon it, and realizing that much of what goes on in medicine begins as anecdotal reports and beliefs and almost a religious belief. This is how all things that we have in modern pharmacologic therapy began.
Bee venom presents an enigma to everyone involved in the research. Only 12 of its 40 ingredients have been identified. As Dawn Wallerstadt, the project director, explains, those that have seem to be positively dangerous.
A lot of the studies that have been done have looked at the individual components of bee venom, and most of them are detrimental. You know, they cause red blood cells to lyse, they cause cell membranes to open up, and you know, if you look at it as different little pieces, you say, well, how can this be effective?
Bee venom is a volatile brew. It's a means of defense, toxic enough to kill animals and even humans if they're allergic to it. Yet in some way, the venom seems to produce a beneficial response to diseases of the immune system and even temporarily relieves the symptoms. Dawn has selected 16 people with MS for her study who are using no other medication and are totally new to venom therapy.
They will come to Georgetown twice a week. They will receive 10 intradermal injections. They will stay for 30 minutes afterwards to make sure they don't have any adverse effects. And so long as everybody is progressing well, we will continue for the duration of the year.
Deborah Wilson has come for her assessment so that Dawn can compare her progress over a period of time.
One test that we can use is this 9-hole peg test that basically times how long it takes you to take an individual peg and put it into each one of these holes. So we're going to do that right now, okay?
MS is extremely hard to diagnose because the symptoms come and go. Deborah's brain is telling her hand what to do, but the messages aren't getting through because her nerve coating is damaged.
I used to have symptoms and then they would go. So actually I was beginning to think maybe I was crazy too, because the symptoms would go and I would walk like you, a normal person.
Desperate for any relief from her symptoms, Deborah volunteered for the program even though bee venom therapy is unproven. Doctors believe that venom somehow stimulates the body to produce its own drugs, pain relievers and antidepressants. But it's still just a theory. Another idea is that the venom acts as a decoy. When the immune system cells are attacking the myelin, the cocktail of chemicals in bee venom distracts the rogue cells and gives the nerves some respite. Dr. Balante hopes that his study will identify the ingredient that works.
It would give a glimmer of hope that there may be something in that crude extract that's maybe present in only small quantities that we could purify and give it in larger quantities, and in that way get a much better response in terms of healing or ameliorating disease.
But MS sufferers cannot wait for research results, and they will not. 10 years ago, the bees changed the life of Pat Wagner.
I was referred to as a breathing corpse. I could not wiggle a toe. I could not see to tell if you're male, female, black, white, wearing earrings. I couldn't hear out of my right ear. I had no bowel or bladder control. My whole body was numb. My dear mother called and asked if I wanted to get a bee sting. I just couldn't believe that. A bee, a little, I couldn't believe it.
At the time, Pat's husband Ray wasn't convinced either.
When Pat first told me that she was going to do bee stings, of course I was real skeptical. I had, no faith in it at all because I'd never heard of such a thing, but I said, well, fine, if that's what you want to do, go ahead.
Within 2 weeks, my hearing came back, and no, we didn't sting inside the ear. My hearing came back, my energy level increased. I was a more pleasant person. My husband could almost deal with me then.
I was no longer a skeptic because I could see drastic improvements in her health. So rather than run around looking for bees all over the state of Maryland, I decided I would just see about getting my own hive and starting myself.
And I changed his name from Ray to Stingray, so here we are, Stingray and the Bee Lady.
Word of Pat's success spread. Now she runs a bee clinic from her home twice a week. Desperate MS victims subject themselves to a dozen painful stings at a time to find relief. These people have tried every form of drug therapy available. The bees offer their only chance of a new life. A young mother, Jean Burke, was diagnosed years ago.
It took me until the 5th year of my diagnosis to start to come see her. And I'm glad I did. Best thing I ever did.
I think life is wonderful. I mean, yeah, I still have some problems. But, I'll take my minor problems now versus facing a deathbed any day. Any day.
Honey, it was so good. Oh.
The public has become an important part of this story because they have asked for and at times even demanded new forms of therapy. And here is where you need research so that you can prove or disprove a hypothesis. Without the research, we're left with faith and belief and imagination, which isn't enough.
Leeches and maggots have won a place in modern medicine. Biosurgery is here to stay. Now the search is on for new partnerships between animals and humans.
The more natural products we can use, the more biological systems that we can incorporate into our medical management, I think the better off we'll all be.
This time, unlike the folk remedies of the past, scientists will show us not only that these creatures save lives, but how they do it. Living proof of the power of nature.
When you use these little creatures right, they work every time.
They literally saved my life.
Hey, I like it.
I think I'm going to get to keep this finger.